It was a quiet and peaceful night in the village, and the moon was shining brightly in the sky. Everything seemed normal until suddenly, the darkness was disturbed by a strange noise. It sounded like something was moving in the shadows. The people who lived in the nearby village had always heard strange noises at night, but they had never seen anything like this before. They were all frightened and locked themselves inside their homes. They knew that something was lurking in the darkness. As the night went on, the noises became louder and more frequent. Everyone was too scared to investigate, but one brave man decided to venture out and take a look. He took a flashlight and went into the darkness. As he walked, he heard something moving behind him. He turned around and shone his flashlight. But there was nothing there. Suddenly, he felt something grab him from behind. He tried to run, but he was too slow. The monster had caught him. The monster was huge and terrifying. It had long, sharp claws and teeth as long as a knife. The man screamed for help, but no one could hear him. The monster dragged him into the darkness and the man was never seen again. After that night, the village was never the same. People were too scared to leave their homes at night and the streets were always empty. The monster remained in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. No one knew where it came from or what it wanted, but everyone knew that it was something to be feared. Days went by and the monster became bolder, attacking people who ventured out at night. The villagers were desperate for a solution to this problem. They had to find a way to stop the monster before it was too late. One day, a group of brave villagers decided to set up a trap for the monster. They dug a deep pit and covered it with leaves and branches, making it look like the ground. Then they put some meat on the top of the pit to lure the monster in. That night, the monster appeared as usual, but this time it fell into the trap. The villagers were overjoyed and quickly covered the pit with heavy rocks to prevent the monster from escaping. The next day, the villagers went to see the monster in the pit, but they were shocked by what they saw. The monster had transformed into a human-like creature. It was revealed that the monster was the result of an experiment gone wrong in a nearby laboratory. The villagers were disgusted and horrified by what they had discovered. They had been living in fear of a monster that was created by humans. The villagers decided to take action against the laboratory and eventually shut it down. The village slowly returned to normal. But the memory of the monster in the darkness remained. The villagers learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of playing with nature and the consequences that can arise from it. So, if you ever find yourself walking alone at night, be careful. The monster in the darkness might not be what it seems. However, years went by and the villagers started to forget about the monster. They went about their lives, and the village returned to its peaceful ways. But one dark and stormy night, the monster returned. The villagers were awakened from their sleep by the sound of the monster's roar. They knew that the monster was back, and they were terrified. The monster had become more powerful than before, and it was no longer content with staying in the shadows. The villagers knew that they had to act quickly. They remembered the trap that they had used to capture the monster before and decided to use it again, but this time, they knew that they had to be more careful. They set up the trap in the same spot. But this time they added more layers of leaves and branches on top of it. They also added more meat to lure the monster in. Then, they waited. The night was long and terrifying. The monster was roaming the village, destroying everything in its path, but finally, it arrived at the trap. It smelled the meat and started to dig through the leaves and branches. As it got closer to the pit, the villagers emerged from their hiding places and started to throw rocks and sticks at the monster. The monster was distracted, and it fell into the trap. The villagers quickly covered the pit with heavy rocks and waited until morning to see what had happened. When they looked into the pit, they were surprised to see that the monster had transformed into a beautiful woman. The woman was confused and scared. She didn't remember anything about her past, but the villagers took her in and cared for her. They found out that she was a victim of the same experiment that had created the monster before. The villagers took care of the woman, and she eventually regained her memory. She was grateful to the villagers for saving her, and she decided to stay in the village. The villagers accepted her, and they all lived happily ever after. The monster in the darkness had caused a lot of fear and destruction, but in the end, it had led to a new beginning. The villagers had learned to be more careful and never to play with nature again, and the woman had found a new home and a new family. Years passed, and the village thrived. The woman who was once the monster in the darkness had become a valued member of the community. She used her experience to help others who had gone through similar traumas, but one night, the villagers started to hear strange noises again. It sounded like something was moving in the shadows. Everyone was scared, but they hoped that it was just their imagination. The next night, the noises became louder and more frequent. The villagers knew that the monster was back. They were terrified, but they knew that they had to do something. They decided to search for the source of the noises. They searched the village and the surrounding area, but they found nothing. The noises continued, and the villagers were on edge. One night, a group of villagers decided to stay up and keep watch. They sat in silence, listening for any sign of the monster, but they heard nothing. The night was quiet and peaceful, just as they were about to give up. They heard a faint noise. It was coming from the forest. They grabbed their flashlights and went to investigate. As they walked deeper into the forest, the noise became louder. It sounded like someone was crying. They followed the noise until they came to a small clearing. There, they saw a young girl sitting on the ground, crying. She was bruised and battered, and she looked scared. The villagers approached her slowly and asked her what had happened. She told them that she had been attacked by a monster in the darkness. The villagers were horrified. They knew that the monster had returned. They took the girl back to the village and tended to her wounds. They knew that they had to prepare for the monster's return. They set up traps and fortified their homes. Days went by, and the monster didn't show up. The villagers started to relax. They thought that maybe the monster had gone for good, but one night, the monster attacked again. It was more powerful than before, and it seemed to be immune to their traps. The villagers were terrified, but they knew that they had to keep fighting. They banded together and fought the monster as best they could. They used everything at their disposal, from rocks to pitchforks. The battle was long and grueling, but finally, the monster was defeated. The villagers were overjoyed, but they knew that they had to be careful. They knew that the monster might return. From that day on, the villagers were always on guard. They never forgot the lessons that they had learned about the dangers of playing with nature, and they always kept an eye out for the monster in the darkness. So, if you ever find yourself walking alone at night, be careful. The monster in the darkness might be waiting for you, and remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that are created by humans. It was a dark and stormy night, the wind howling outside and rain pelting against the window panes. I was alone in my house, with nothing but the sound of the storm and my own thoughts to keep me company. But then I heard something, a faint scratching noise coming from outside my bedroom door. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind, but the scratching grew louder and more persistent. My heart began to race as I realized that there was something out there, lurking in the darkness. I slowly got out of bed and tiptoed over to the door. Pressing my ear against it to try and hear what was on the other side, the scratching stopped, and for a moment there was silence, but then I heard a low growl, and suddenly the door burst open. There it was, a monster, with glowing red eyes and razor-sharp teeth. It was covered in matted fur, and its claws scraped against the floor as it moved closer and closer. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was frozen in fear as the monster loomed over me, its hot breath on my face. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end to come, but then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the monster vanished. I was left alone in the darkness, still trembling with fear. Was it just a nightmare, or was there really a monster lurking in the shadows? For the rest of the night, I huddled under the covers, too afraid to move or even breathe. But as the sun began to rise and the storm abated, I knew that I couldn't stay in my room forever. I slowly got out of bed, my heart still racing, and cautiously made my way to the window. As I looked out, I saw something moving in the shadows. It was the monster. Its eyes glowing in the dim light of the morning. I realized then that it wasn't just a nightmare. The monster was real, and it was still out there, waiting for me. Days went by with the monster nowhere to be seen, but every night, I could sense its presence, watching me from the darkness. I tried to ignore it, but it was always there, lurking just out of sight. One night, as I was lying in bed, I heard a strange noise coming from the closet. It sounded like something was scratching on the door, trying to get in. I got up and slowly made my way over to the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened the door, I saw the monster, its eyes glowing bright red in the darkness. I tried to run, but it was too fast. It chased me through the house, its claws scraping against the floor as it closed in on me, just as it was about to catch me. I woke up, drenched in sweat and gasping for breath. It was just a dream, but the fear was real. I knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for me in the darkness. From that day on, I lived in fear of the monster, never knowing when it would strike again. I tried to keep my house well lit and my doors locked, but I knew that it was only a matter of time before the monster would find a way to get to me, and then, one night, it did. I woke up to find the monster standing at the foot of my bed, its eyes glowing bright red. It lunged towards me. And I knew that this was the end, but just as it was about to strike, the monster vanished, as if it had never been there at all. I was left alone in the darkness, trembling with fear and confusion. To this day, I still don't know what the monster was or why it haunted me. But I know one thing for sure, it's still out there, waiting for its next victim in the darkness. As the days went by, the fear of the monster grew stronger. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I started to see its glowing red eyes everywhere I went, even in the daytime. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that the monster wasn't real, but deep down, I knew that I was lying to myself. The monster was real, and it was out there, somewhere in the darkness. One night, I heard a scratching noise outside my window. I cautiously made my way over to it and peered out. There, in the bushes, I saw the monster, its eyes glowing bright red in the moonlight. I quickly shut the window and locked it. But I knew that it was only a matter of time before the monster found a way in. I couldn't keep living like this, always looking over my shoulder, always afraid. So I made a plan. I would confront the monster, face to face, and end this once and for all. I armed myself with a flashlight and a baseball bat, and waited in the darkness for the monster to come, and it did. It came out of nowhere, charging towards me with its claws outstretched. I swung the bat with all my might, hitting it squarely in the head. The monster let out a blood-curdling roar, and I thought for sure that it was going to kill me. But then, something strange happened. The monster started to shrink and change shape, until it was no longer a monster at all. It was just a small, frightened animal, a raccoon, to be exact. I was stunned. All this time, I had been living in fear of a harmless little raccoon. I couldn't believe how foolish I had been. But then, I heard a noise behind me. I turned around to see another monster, even bigger and scarier than the first. It was real this time, and it was coming for me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing and my body trembling. It was just a dream, but the fear was real. I knew that the monster was still out there, waiting for me in the darkness.